Well, hello, everybody. We are back, the Transformation and Transcendence Roundtable podcast. We talk everything spiritual, mystical, but we're all psychotherapists, psychologists, that sort of thing. So we're we come from a psychotherapy, psychological point of view more than a metaphysical point of view. Not that we don't capture metaphysics sometimes, but we're all healers of different sorts in a very real medical sense. So we have credentials and stuff like that, degrees. Anyway, so welcome. And I was just thinking, our website, which is Transformation and Transcendence Coaching, talks about balance in the personality. And it just occurred to me before we came on the air that of the symmetry between balance inside, balance between the higher self and the relationship of our ego faculties, will, and intelligence. And Joshua, can you mute your mic while you're not on?
Sorry.
Me too.
Yeah. So balance between like ego faculties of will and discernment and all that kind of identification with us as a separate individual with the universal self, which is our capacity to feel our oneness and our empathic resonance and our actual oneness with others and the planet and the ecology. So that as we develop a greater balance and surrender to the universal self or the higher self, what happens is that has far more ability and power to direct our lives, to guide our lives in effective ways, to overcome the self-other kind of dichotomy that gets us in problems in ways, intuitive, wise ways that we can't manage with our ego faculties. Not well, anyway. So when we ask for our, in many ways, by just really tuning into ourselves, or really asking ourselves in our own minds, or tuning into our psyche more deeply, when we ask for this kind of guidance from our universal self to be part of our life, great things happen. Balance occurs in our life. Joy occurs in our life. Solutions to problems that we can't manage from, using our will and using our kind of more abstract, linear kind of judgment faculties that we try to use with our ego. When it comes from the poetic or the wise, and life begins to go more smoothly. And as we can do this more and more, it goes better and better as we move along in life. And this is a big job of spiritual development from most spiritual mystical points of view. Even if you look at more mystical Christianity, because I know kind of sometimes church going kind of believe that God's outside, sort of in the clouds, and it's an abstraction kind of in a sense, and you just have to worship. Well, this idea is different. Not that worship isn't fine, but that God is also inside, and spirituality is inside, and the kingdom of heaven is inside, and nirvana is inside, and all these kinds of things. And so as you tune into that, it becomes more emergent in our lives, not at one time, because we can't even stand, as regular people, we can't even stand this flood of joy and ecstasy that may occur. We have this dissolution kind of fears. So we have to gradually, as we surrender our ego to these universal self, where all these capacities lie for joy and bliss and ecstasy and judgment and love, we have to do it kind of gradually, as fast as we can, but by self-examination, where we're afraid and where we separate off our ego faculties. Our self seems to be separate from this oneness, and we feel like we can only exist by being against the others and against oneness, and have to be in competition, and we have to win out and be better than. So separateness, self-identity, it takes on this kind of distorted form that if we surrender to the oneness as well, the paradox of being an individual and at one with others, if we surrender to that, we're going to die. We're going to lose ourselves, And this is a great wall that we must overcome in our spiritual development, so that we have a sense of eternality too, in the surrender with the all, but simultaneously maintain our individuality. That's the great paradox. Now, some spiritual schools think you don't, think you lose your individuality when you surrender to the all. I don't happen to be one of them, and I have Buddhist friends. Some think that way, and some don't. And I have mystical friends, and some think that way, and some don't. But all my understanding, and all my searching, and all my teaching, that's the paradox. It isn't that you don't exist as an individual when you advance. You exist as an individual and as a sense of being at one with the all simultaneously. So that's, you don't have to believe that. Everybody can believe what they want, but I'm just saying that's what I really understood through all my teachings. And yeah, I mean, all the teachers I've interacted with. I'm not talking about my teaching per se, but I meant by what I've learned through others and reading and my own experience with meditation and that sort of thing. So anyway, I'll start with that. That's a lot, right? I said a lot. and we may have some case material too. Hopefully we do, or even self kind of discussion too. Hopefully that just gets us going. I thought that might be important.
Mm-hmm. That is a lot. There's so much there. One of the things I pick up on right away there, Dr. Solers, is just the idea that sometimes following a process like that, it's almost like you become more of yourself, more of an individual in a sense, which
Yes.
seems so counterintuitive, because you'd think it would be just the opposite, more like the dissolution of the individuality, like you were mentioning.
Right. Absolutely. You begin to be able, because you're in control of yourself and your desire, and you have to have this and you have to have that. When you let go of some of these things, the urgency, as in the Buddhist kind of idea, that the desire is a problem. Well, it's a problem if it's too urgent, if it's forcing. You have to have, but desire can be great too. I mean, you want to move out to your loved ones, you want to give. This is all desire. You want to advance spiritually, you want to advance emotionally, so that you're more loving and kind. That's desire too. But if you have this forcing desire, you separate yourself. But if you can let that go, you can find that you can assert yourself and you can have your boundaries better, because you really have this wise kind of intuitive sense of where you stop, and what, when you need to say no to someone, and then ultimately, or when you need to say yes to someone, maybe let go of your personal interests at times because you really want to give to others or give to a cause or something, and you have to sacrifice a little. But it's done in a sense of joy, not obligation, and not just suffering, because you have a feeling that you're doing this, in rhythm with self and other, in a way that, again, the ego has a hard time managing, but the universal self doesn't. And you're you, and it really it grasps the idea of the other, as well as the surrender and the paradox of being one with others, and not making them more important than you unless you really need to in the moment, but fundamentally not more important. And you're not less, but also you don't have to conquer and be better and win out and be special to other people and have them worship you. You don't need any of that, because you love yourself, right? And then you can be yourself very fully and not have to sell out to other people's esteeming you or valuing you so much. That's light. That's lighthearted for you, Hey, you like people to like you, but you can live without it, that kind of thing. That kind of thing.
Well, and one thing I wonder about that is sort of, I guess it's sort of a developmental question or sort of like a life timeline. And it might correspond to someone's actual age, but it might not be so time based, but just developmentally based. And I guess what I'm thinking of, just from my own experience, I know we all come from different places, different backgrounds, different personalities, different traditions, different training, etc.
Yeah.
But like, super roughly speaking, part of where I came from, I think to some extent it's common, but to some extent it was unusual, that the starting point wasn't so much starting with being an individual and all of that. It was more, I almost started more in an environment where we were already thinking about the transcendent. And so part of my process, and I know I'm not alone on this, but is sort of like I had to sort of take a path of just establishing. I mean, it sounds very rough and crude, but establishing my ego. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like building a lot of my process for many years was just like, it sounds so it's weird, really, but building the ego. Because
Yeah.
I was confused at first about that. I was like, what? Uh, this is exactly what I'm not supposed to do. This everything I've been learned or picked up. I no, ego bad, you know.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm thinking of that depending on where people come from, depending on their own sense of themselves and the relationship to others and the other, kind of in a big O sense, um, that depending on where we are and on a existential map or timeline, that sometimes we, like in my case, I needed ego building at least for a while. And I mean, this is
Absolutely.
kind of, yeah, it's kind of crudely put, but it's sort of like you almost have to have an ego in order to transcend it. I mean, because some people, it just seems like want to just skip over everything, like just go right into, let's just jump right into transcendence of the ego or things like that. It's like, but wait a minute, we got to work on having one first. And maybe that just sounds too simple and blunt, but that's kind of where I'm going, wondering about that developmental thing there.
No, I think I think it's well put. I don't think it's crude at all. What you said is really well put. Absolutely. I mean, you can't surrender an ego unless it's really strong enough to surrender. Otherwise, it's just kind of falling apart. And then you have elements sometimes of like character faults, like entitlement. People want life to take care of them because they can't take care of themselves. They're emotionally dependent. So they when they try to surrender, what they're really doing is kind of just hoping that they can be worshipped rather than that they're strong individuals who can surrender and be part of the whole. There's a lot of confusion in that. So yes, having the ability to emotional independence and self-care and boundaries and decision-making abilities that you don't sell out to what you imagine appearances might be, or other people liking you for your appearance. All those kind of things are really important to be able to surrender. And then you never want to, ego is also means self. So you never want to give up this individual self. You just don't want to do it. But I mean, not totally. I mean, you want to surrender. That's not dissolving it. Yeah. And it has to be strong to surrender. Okay, I'm trying to support what you're saying because it's really right on. And then sometimes you go in rhythm, you surrender, and then you have to work on your emotional dependence a little bit more. You're living for appearance values a little more, or you're not lacking. You're having anxiety about asserting yourself for healthy things, that kind of stuff. You have to work on that. Leah, did you want to jump in? Did you? Somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there because, Ben, like what you're talking about and what you were talking about, Dr. Sellers, too, is uh, I also had to start building an ego. I mean, part of my ego, there was, and there still is, there's definitely areas of work to do, not just with like self-esteem and confidence, but also with like the other like side of it, right? Where there's like that pride and that boastfulness and, because we all deal with these things. These are things we don't like to admit or talk about out loud. But one thing's for sure is if we aren't talking about it and we're just kind of like, oh, let me just skip to my loo and get right past that to transcendence, then you're going to be doing a lot of backtracking. And because I mean, it's not just being aware, but it's also being honest with yourself and recognizing that like we have consistent like opportunities to continue to grow. I mean, I know I do. And I know that a lot of people that are coming to us do as well. And, I love that you also mentioned, Ben, that ego is on a spectrum because I kind of describe this to clients, not even just when I'm relating to ego, but when I'm relating to a bunch of different things. Like even areas of struggles for clients. I'll say, there's a spectrum for everything. So, you might be over here and you're really close to being able to begin to like conquer and deal with what you're struggling with. But then if you fall into another area more to the right or to the left, there might be a bit more work to do. There might be a bit more entanglement. And I think that can definitely be said with the ego as well. That some people have a bit more of that like confidence, but not like inflated confidence, and are more ready to start building upon transcendence. Whereas others are starting to build up their confidence, starting to know more of who they are, their worth in the world, and like what they can achieve. And as they continue to build and build and build upon that, then they'll get to a point where their ego is strong enough to be able to be surrendered.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Yeah, very good. All these, Ear and Ben's articulation of the idea of a healthy, strong ego and its place in development, to be able to surrender to the higher self and never actually totally give it up, but it has to be strong enough that it can be surrendered when that voluntarily all the time, and it becomes part then of the universal self, and the universal self becomes part of it. So there's a integration that happens organically, but we keep our identity and we keep our surrender, and which allows us, a static. This is really, honestly, evolves to cosmic consciousness or nirvana or satori. Now we're probably only going to make it in measures, right? We're only going to, as we work through our work. But some people who've really worked on themselves many lifetimes, I would think, and or maybe just are in a better place. I don't know, but they get there. But I don't know. I'm just too much. Have too many human failings to, I think, make it really gigantically. But as life has gone on, my life has become more joyful and happy and peaceful. And as I do surrender this ego, which it's with its troubles, that I learned to resolve through self-understanding, it gets better and better. That's my path. Yeah, that's my path.
Yeah, I like to hop in. The Bodhisattva, from what I've learned about, was basically the person who didn't go all the way and didn't completely dissolve their ego and remain behind to help others lead them towards the path to enlightenment. Where the Buddha was the one who completely surrendered, completely let go, and completely dissolved the ego. And this conversation is bringing to my mind, I talked to a friend this past weekend, and she's working in behavioral health in Arizona. And she told me this really interesting story where this person that they were working with, she didn't have her phone and she was acting this certain way. And then as soon as they gave her her phone back, it was like her personality just switched to something different. And it was really interesting to me. Like they were like labeling dissociative identity disorder. But I'm thinking in terms of like some of this part stuff, but more so like I think we build our personalities in relationship to an object, in relationship to something else. And so primarily that starts with mom and dad, probably, or parent figures. And the ego, if we have to build our ego, we have to build a personality. And then, well, what are we building in relationship to is sort of my question. And like this idea that like there's these awesome, it's called a bhava chakra, but it's like this wheel of samsara in Buddhist art. And the Buddha is sitting on the right side on a cloud, and he's always pointing at the moon. And it's sort of symbolically, from what I remember reading, that becoming Buddha isn't the goal. The goal is enlightenment. Buddha is just the one pointing the path to enlightenment. And so, like, if enlightenment is the goal, then can we build an ego that is oriented towards that goal in relationship to that.
Uh-huh.
Just as this person, they built a whole personality based on their phone. And you take that phone away from them, and it takes away that whole personality, because that personality needs something to operate with. And so, like, we were talking sort of like this spiritual bypassing sort of thing, like, oh, like I've got this pride, well, I just want to get over that, I just want to go be done with that, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like any of these other elements. And it's like, well, maybe you're supposed to have that. Maybe having that pride or having that flaw and going through that effort of whatever adventure it takes you on, or whatever journey it takes you through, that's what you need for the growth of your whole personality. Yeah, so that's just what I was thinking, I guess.
Very good. Very good.
Well, everybody's saying a lot here, and there's about 1,000 directions we could go in right here. I mean, one of the things I'm picking up on right now, Josh, was just that idea of, well, we gotta relate. There's got to be, we're relating to something. We're relating to an object. And I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but it makes, I'm kind of filling in from what you said, Dr. Solers, about like, well, it could be higher self. And then where I start going is filling in, like, I start to think of it as almost like a mathematical formula, or like a linguistic formula, where it's like, okay, now what is the object? And then I like want to put an X in there as like it's an unknown, or it's not an unknown, but it's a variable. I just sort of go to the abstract for a second with that, and then I start thinking, okay, well, sometimes maybe now I'm just brainstorming here from where I'm coming from, but like, one place I go is like, oh, well, we call that the higher self. Another place we go is we call it something else. Another place we go is like, some people are like, well, it's got to be an object. And then another place to go is like, well, somehow we humans have an ability to make an object out of things that are absent. So it's like, even things that are not immediately present or even present, we can still, like, quote unquote, objectify that and then have a relationship there. So it's just like, it starts to get mind blowing for me with that. And so I'm not totally sure where I'm going with this. I guess what I would leave off here with is, one of the things this leads me to is that there is a relative element, that I hear in what you're saying there. Well, what everyone's saying here, but of it's not just me, it's me and some other, and then there's a relationship there, and then if there are different others, the dynamic of who I am does change, depending on the various quote unquote objects. Some thoughts there.
Okay, Leah, go ahead.
Okay, we're about to get real deep. Because I've been actually thinking, as soon as you opened your mouth, Josh, I was like, oh boy, here we go. The gates are opening. Because this gets really philosophical here for a second, because if there are so many different parts that help to build upon our identity, then who the heck are we anyway? Are we really ourselves? Are we really like residing from like a place of our own individuality and identity? Because if we were put into different developmental situations or different households, we would have totally different experiences, probably totally different beliefs, different understandings of the world. And one of the things, that I had come to like a crazy moment, maybe a couple weeks back, and not necessarily crazy, but it was one of those existential experiences of, oh my gosh, am I really myself? Am I really living out what I actually want? Or have I been living out what everyone in my life has been conducting and pushing me towards? based around like my beliefs, based around just who raised me. And it was it was a little bit overwhelming. I'll put it that way. But it really helped me to start on a new journey of, you know what do I actually want? What, rather than all of these other things that people have maybe said I should be looking after or looking towards, or but like, what do I intrinsically want with my existence? And that's where this journey has been kind of going from there. And so I'm more now looking towards, what do I want? And that's actually a really tricky thing to do. And the reason it is because we have so many things from our past locked into it. So even if I am like, oh, well, I really want to keep moving in the direction that I'm already in, how do I know that it wasn't already embedded from like my past experiences and relationships with others, or my need to be able to help people, to showcase love, or to take responsibility for other people's emotions throughout my life at points? So one of the things that I definitely do mention to my clients in particular is every single person that you are interacting with has a past, and they are presenting you with their past every time you have a perceived interaction with them. So you're really not directly talking to the individual in that sense. You're talking to their past experiences, traumas. But I'll leave it at that because I could go on and on. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing this up.
Yeah, there's something in there. I feel that. I resonate with that. And that one of the things that I talk about with clients at times is to really help them clarify what they want. Because sometimes they've never been asked what they want. I remember I was working at this COVID lab before I started doing the therapy work, and I remember asking people that there, and like people would like light up like, wait, what? Like I can actually want something that I want? Like that, like they've never just been directly asked, like, what do you want? Like, what do you want with your life? What do you want? And it's there is that expectation effect. So many people are living in expectation, like, how do I live up to the expectations of others? Where it's like, okay, well, we have our higher self. How do we live up to the expectation of that? And how do we, if we don't even know what that part, that higher self in us is? Yeah.
I gotta say, I'm getting chills when we're
Absolutely.
talking about this.
Yeah.
Well, I think, let me try to just kind of bring things together a little bit. Try anyway. So one element is, I do think as we live more, not from appearances, but from what are like our being values, which I think we do find from our higher self, which are love and attachment feelings and caring and self-love and joy and pleasure, these positive life affirming affects and needs for these kinds of functionalities. And we can let go of having to do something so that we appear great or appear better, or we have more money, or we're doing something material that's just for ego purposes, conspicuous consumption. But we have our real needs for relationship and health, as health care of ourselves and things like that, and having time for our loved ones and being our best self with them, giving emotionally, not just physically and not just monetarily, but giving, putting ourselves out there, taking a little risk with our emotionality, trying to engage even if it's scary, that kind of thing. As we do this more, I think we know more what we want as we move forward, and it's more intuitive. It isn't from a rule down, it's more from the intuition, from the universal self that springs up, right? But when we're trapped in appearances and ego functioning, to rise up in other people's eyes and have other people think of us as special, we get trapped in that kind of imagery and that kind of way of relating to the world, and we don't know what we really want so much. So the path is to know yourself in these ways by your real how can I say it? By your being values of love and joy and pleasure and giving, and the idea that to give really, if you can get to this point, or how well we get to this point, that Jesus wasn't just kidding around. To give is better than receive. If you can really feel the joy, now you can. There's a transcendence of the duality of giving and receiving, because when you receive from other people, you're giving to them by your reception of what they give. But the point there is, you don't have this fear that you have to hoard and grab and all that kind of thing when you live from your deeper real self with its being values. Does that make sense? The other thing with Joshua I was resonating with was the idea of the pains that come to you, the faults that come to you. So yeah, they're part of who we are. That's like our, you might say, some people call it like authentic self or something. It's tried to find the language, but this is Rumi's idea with the guest house too. It's a mystical way that pains and troubles in our life and the feelings that go along with them are really our teachers, right? And they don't appear to us because some bad person out there just did it. Now, there may be some bad person out there, but there's something in who you are that you need to experience this trouble. I know this may not sound easy and maybe problematic for some. It feels harsh, but troubles come our way as teachers because we need them. Because we need to transform something. If we look inside and breathe into it and try to relax into the pain or the problem and try to learn what we're doing, that's a hook up that, in terms of our issues, our faults, or our urgency, or whatever it might be, appearance values, that brings us to us, that needs to be there for us to learn and to work with, to let go of, resolve, or to bring out another point. Like maybe you have to have some courage to allow people to not like what you're doing at certain times, or not be passive. That may be another aspect of it. But as we do that, the problems begin to resolve and they become joyful. And this is or joy follow. This is the transcendence of pain and pleasure, of trouble and blissful kind of being, trouble and peace. Both are teachers. And we have to also get used to good times and the joy of feeling this surrender, and which has a dissolution anxiety, as we talked about at the beginning. We were afraid we're going to lose ourselves in this joy. I went to this Bruce Springsteen concert last night. I tell you what, I was crying half the time, and not because my friend says, well, this was a lot of touching, emotional, sad stuff. I said, yeah, that's true. But it wasn't that. It was the aesthetic quality of the music and all the people and everybody's joining in, and the affect that's touched, that resonates, and kind of the heroic affect of the surrender and passion for life and taking chances with life and reaching for the sacred in life in the moment, the smallest moments. I just, it just moved me, and I felt tears because that's how my system could do it. It came through tears of joy, you might say. Anyway, so, but you see, simultaneously with the joy and the ecstasy that was there of the surrendering to this unitive kind of moment was the difficulty going through it. And I think that's why probably the joy came, because I couldn't have more pure, just ecstatic, which is okay. I mean, I was fine with it. The tears were fine with me, and they were moving, but I couldn't sing along very well because I started to cry. So that was a little particular problem. Other than that, it wasn't a problem at all. Anyway, I thought that might be informative. That example.
Yeah.
We have to work with the good and the bad, and they're both teachers. Yeah.
Well, it makes me think of the idea of collective effervescence coming from Emil Durkheim, just sort of that ecstatic experience in a large group of people like that. And it's interesting to me that you raise that as in a situation where we're talking about the individual and the ego, and then transcending it. And I couldn't help think earlier too of, I know you've talked before, Dr. Sellers, about this, thinking in terms of a healthy ego versus like unhealthy, that healthy versus unhealthy And I couldn't help also but thinking of something you mentioned, Leah, previously, that we're definitely not talking about if you're in abusive situations or things like that. That's not what we're talking about here. But yeah, I think one of the things that I'm probably going to be thinking about this conversation for a while, because we got into a lot of rich stuff. But one thing I'm just coming away with right at this second is also thinking about kind of like external locus of control, internal locus of control. Is kind of you started off with that, Dr. Sellers, at the beginning, and then came back around to it. Of that's a big shift that I think about, of sort of thinking about everything out there, all the objects out there. It's God out there, it's the higher self out there, or whatever. But then that's so external locus of control. But then a shift to thinking about it, kingdom of God within, the universal self within, or whatever, x fill in the blank, and within. So that's one of the main things I'm coming away with right at the moment.
Yes. And to tune in and bring that out and make it manifest in our lives. But the internal processing is really the locus of control. And I know people get really upset because all these bad things can happen out there, but they are related. Even in tragedies, there's something inside of us that's related to that. That is why we're involved in it, and even sort of in a distant planetary way. If we see something on television or some tragedy, we are part of this overall world ecology and noosphere, and our lower self and our faults and stuff are a part of it. Even if we hate what's going on out there, we might find, if we look inside, that we have our own egoism, like Putin does, or we have our own imperialism, like somebody else does, or our own narcissism, like this politician does, and that one, or our own joy and our own Schadenfreude, our own joy in other people's injuries. Sometimes that tragedies also speak to us about, because we're also humans who have a lower self that needs to be worked on, which allows for us to at some point, as the sayings go, that begins to be transcended, and then we're left more with helping other people with their stuff. But that's I think the direction and the work. Yeah. Okay.
We've still got the Putin, etc. within.
Yes.
That's
right. We have the bad stuff within. That's why it comes to us. Now it may be 1,000th, 1,000,000th, but there's something resonant. You see, does that make sense? And we don't have to have an equivalence in our mind, but there, in some sense, there's a little sliver of something we have to work on, at least, right? That kind of thing. Yeah. And do what we can about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the other big takeaways is that we can learn to not feel so much shame for the fact that we do have the little Putin inside of us, or this rage that sometimes expands, but that we're not going to act it out, but that we recognize that it is a piece of what we could do if we chose to.
Yes. And then, yeah, that's right. Absolutely. That's absolutely. Then we kind of acknowledge it and try to let it be, and understand that we have higher self stuff. And underneath that, because a lot of times the rage is a distortion of the higher, right? There isn't two forces in the universe fundamentally. There are two forces, but the negative and the positive, or evil and good. But they come from one, and the evil and the cruelty and stuff is a distortion of the good. It's a distortion. It's the life force that gets distorted and has been distorted and corrupted. That's really important to know. That's another thing we could talk about in the future. Everybody doesn't agree with that, but the mystical thinkers do. Yeah, that's true. God, interesting. I use that word. Thank you. We have to go. All good things must end. But it was really great. It was great having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
All. Yeah. And we'll see you all next week. If you want help from anybody here from the podcast, because we're all life coaches, you can do Connect. If you Google Connect at franklinsolers.com, that'll work. The other one is a little bit more complicated. Well, I'll leave it there for today because I've said that other one before. And I also have a phone number on the website you can go to, and that's the coaching platform. It would be Transcendence, Transformation and Transcendence Life Coaching. Yeah. And you should be able to get us. You put Michigan at the end, Transformation and Transcendence Life Coaching, Michigan, you'll get us real quickly. You don't have to look so far down the roster. Yeah. And so we're all happy to be of help in any way we can. I also have a book out. It's called Food for Psyche, Spirit, and Soul. Yeah. And we have contributors here to the book, Ben and Joshua. And Leah is very supportive of the whole process and helps us with the production end a little bit too. So, okay, thanks everybody. We got to run. Have a great day, great week. We'll see you all next week.